Not all the book clubs are going to be weekly. We want to still talk about One Piece.
I don't know if you heard about One Piece. It's a little manga about a pirate, one pirate.
It's about a pirate who almost never steals or plunders.
Also does not sail around the world.
He sails around a lot of the world.
Nope.
What's up, squishies? Don't run away. Don't run away. We're talking about politics now.
Oh my God. Are we having a conversation for the first time ever claiming that One Piece is political?
This is the first time we've ever done that.
I don't know. This is a dangerous zone to go in. We usually try to stay out of that zone.
So, welcome, people of YouTube. This is Mom Piece, where we do book clubs as mother and son. Manga, I guess, is the series. But do you want to introduce yourself for anyone who might have clicked on this video who doesn't know us?
Yeah, I'm a self-proclaimed really nice person.
Is that your entire introduction?
You know what? I'll give a name. My name is Mama Drawk. We do manga. You've been asking me to read One Piece for about, we think, 15 years. And we finished, we're caught up, and we've started doing a few others. Today, we're going to have a conversation about whether or not One Piece is political. If you've ever landed on any of our stuff before, you'll know that we never talk about politics. We really keep politics out of everything that we do. We never have anyone talking about how they wish we wouldn't talk about politics. We're pretty unpolitical. Some might even say anti-political. I wouldn't go quite that far, but you know, pretty unpolitical.
To cut through the sarcasm, we want to do a series where we talk about the politics in One Piece, but I think we need to start that off by really actually taking on, is One Piece political? How do you know if media is political? And I want to start by saying something very clear, which is the argument you'll get from a lot of people immediately is all art is political. Now, I will say, philosophically, I agree with this point. I think because politics is about your belief of how humans should be managed, and stories are about a character accomplishing something or not, and why, right? I don't think you can write a story that doesn't reflect your political beliefs to an extent. However, that's not what we're talking about when we say One Piece is political, right?
No, it's not what I'm talking about, no.
No, this is a series that I believe is very deeply political. Like, it is made intentionally to say something about the world. And I don't think just in a philosophical way. I don't think in just a musing about ideas way. I think this is a series with a political agenda. Now, there's two little caveats I want to start before we get to it.
I have a caveat too, so caveat off.
My first caveat is, hey, if you are right-leaning or centrist, I do believe One Piece is fairly left-leaning. And because people bring in left-leaning politics, I think a lot of the right-leaning people really don't like hearing that One Piece is political. But try to remember, you can deeply appreciate something and still disagree with it. You can love the storytelling and something and disagree with it. I bring this up a lot because they're my two go-to examples, but I believe that the Dark Knight Returns comics and 300 are very right-wing, politically active pieces of media. I'm on the left. I still love them as works of art. I think they're beautiful fiction. I think they're well told, and it's worth understanding more deeply, even if it ends up being something you disagree with. I can engage with it and really, really love it, even though I politically disagree with it. So I encourage you to be open-minded about our conversation if you are against left-wing politics, because you can still love something you disagree with. It's fully possible. The next little caveat, I want to push each other's ideas and actively try to disprove ourselves, because I think that's how we're going to have a more convincing conversation about this.
That's not really why. Drawk wants to make me cry.
That's exactly why, actually. It's all a lie. I just want to make her cry on camera. All right, you go.
And I just want to say a caveat that I'm glad that we're doing this, because I think that at one time we were sold a bill of lies that everyone just started to come up with and agree upon. The idea that we don't talk about politics or religion around people if we want to be in polite society. That those are two things that hold us so differently, that our political beliefs and our religious or non-religious beliefs are so separating that instead of talking about them, we avoid them at all costs in order to always get along when we're with people who have opposing ideas to us, which I think, in my opinion, is a pile of steaming bullshit. Because what it does instead is it doesn't allow people to hear from people who have very different ideas than them politically and religiously. And it doesn't allow people to spark debate amongst each other or learn to have conversations where you're not in agreement, but you're not fighting. All you're doing is seeking deeper information. People feel like politics has become like math. Everyone thinks that it's really, really at an arm's length and only super academic people engage in politics. And it's turning it from being something that it should be, which is for every person. The society leads the way of what they're looking for. And how can you lead the way for what you're looking for if you have never, ever, ever learned about different forms of politics? And so politics should be at a very basic level. Politics should be for everyone, and everyone should care, because politics ultimately decide the way you live in your life and how your country, your province, or your state and your town are run. You should care there. And I would argue that having political conversations should become commonplace. And that's my caveat.
I think today's conversation is going to be so fun. How do you analyze if something's political? And the issue is, at a certain point, it really feels like a vibe check. It really feels like you're just looking at it for vibes. Vibe check. Naruto, not intentionally political. All art is political, so it is, but it doesn't feel like that's the goal of Naruto. My Hero kind of wants to be, but drops the ball and it's not well thought out.
Rude.
That's my vibe check. And I think I can get more into why that's my vibe check with a more detailed conversation like this. But at a certain point, when you've practiced media literacy a lot, the issue is you reflexively don't have a good way to explain what you're doing. I really want to get into what our vibe checks are based off of, what information this is based off of.
In my philosophy class, the thing I always tell is a measure of intelligence is how gently you can hold your ideas in your hand and be willing to be persuaded with the right evidence.
Yeah. Disagreeing with media means you're actually taking it in and thinking about it. All right, we good? Do we have all our intro? It's a long intro, but it's a big topic.
Dun, 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 dun. We're doing an intro. Now it's done. The end.
That song kicked
Thank you
ass.
so much.
All right, how do we do it? Where do we start?
How would I create a thing that determines whether or not something is political?
I think that we as a people have gotten really bad at trusting our reading of a situation. There's an expectation a lot of people have that everything is going to be blatantly stated to you. And if it's not directly stated, if One Piece never says, I am political media, you kind of don't buy it. I think you need a certain level of reading what isn't said directly. Your expectation for what's political media can't be media that tells you it has a political message intentionally. Because I think something that wants to sell its political message well isn't going to say so.
Our argument is that One Piece is built politically intentionally.
Yes, it is built from the ground up. You get into the semantic loops. Look, how do we define it? It was intention. It was built to be.
Yeah.
You will not manage to create a good definition for a sandwich. You just won't. Try building a sandwich definition that includes a meatball sub, but doesn't include a hot dog. It's really difficult, and you'll find it actually will add in loopholes you don't want. What is a sandwich? Well, if someone asks you for a sandwich and you give it to them and they wouldn't be mad at you or think that you're lying or tricking them, that's a sandwich. You gotta go based off of intention and how we use words.
To be careful there, because that's exactly why we're talking about, if you say to somebody, this is how it is built in, they need to be able to agree with it. But there's also people who are going to disagree and be like, no, I totally put tomatoes in my fruit salad.
So I think you found a great criteria, trying to prove that from the ground up, One Piece is built politically and with political messaging involved.
And I would argue that it is intentionally political, and so would you, but we need to be able to call each other on it.
Yes.
So originally, you had a thought that One Piece felt very Marxist to you.
I think it uses Marxist tools of analysis, but hey everybody, you hear that and you want to click leave video, right? What you should know is that Marxist analysis and Marxist philosophy are incredibly different. Very few people argue Marx wasn't skilled as an analyst. A lot of people think that his prescriptions are bad, the choices you should make for society are bad. Very, very, very few people think that Marx was a bad thinker when it came to analyzing the world. So when I say it acts Marxist in its analysis, that's not a huge statement.
I think also that people don't always understand what Marxism is. It critiques the structure of capitalist society, emphasizing the conflict between a working class, that's who you call the proletariats, and that's most of us, and the owning class, the bourgeoisie. It argues that capitalism inherently leads to a class struggle. That's what we kind of see inside of our life. People who own people and own the places that people work and places that people work.
What's interesting is One Piece, while capitalism, it seems to exist, there are businesses and the like, there's also a dominating force of hegemony, the world government, a group that's in charge of literally everything, and there is a born class of elites that you could see as a reference to bourgeoisie, but you could also just see them as a reference to monarchies, to the born wealthy.
Okay, I want to get into fun stuff. Ready?
Go, let's do it.
Okay, so I think that One Piece is political from the ground up. I think that some people see it as this thing where it's about freedom and adventure, and so they would see some of the stuff that we're talking about as just being oh, well, that's talking about freedom and adventure. That's not talking about political undertones. That's talking about camaraderie and blah, 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 which I don't think are mutually exclusive. But for instance, when you look at things like Romance Dawn and the early arcs, we start with things like tyranny, like with Alvida, and then Captain Morgan, and corruption. Like when we're in Arlon Park, we see that the government is coming in with corrupt people right away. So they intentionally have good and bad people on both sides. And I think that the beginning arcs being less obviously political, but political in their theming, like tyranny or corruption or discrimination or or slavery, like the bondage of Nami, I think is an intentional thing that Oda was doing as a way to slowly, quietly drag you into a political manga without knowing it, because he could touch on all these different political themes without actually going, hey, we're going to talk about modern slavery. It is time to talk about corruption in the government. Instead, he would just have these characters doing things on all sides. Everyone was at some point. And I think that he did that intentionally as a way of creating what I called a quiet political floor in which to build on.
When people say it's just about freedom, I think what people forget is that freedom can be a very basic philosophical concept, but freedom isn't guaranteed under most political systems. I don't think Oda writes about freedom as a generic abstract. I don't think he writes about it as, I want to do what I want. I think, especially as the series goes on, and we see this a lot in the Four Emperors saga, Oda thinks about what freedom means in a very political way. We see him really bring into question who is free, what grants you freedom. Are the people who were free and happy in Dressrosa actually free if their leader was too weak to protect them and protect their freedom? Were the people in Whole Cake Island choosing to give their soul to Big Mom actually free if leaving and not giving their soul would likely cost their lives? I think that Oda doesn't think about freedom as a very vague and abstract thing, but as a real thing that we can see tangibly, even early on, the way you're talking about. Now, to play devil advocate, I will say, sure, but it's not like evil kings and bad guys are exclusive to really intentionally political media. People use a bad guy who is an evil king or corrupt or takes people's freedom all the time for fairly non-political feeling works, just because it's an easy way to create motivation. How would you argue then that One Piece is doing something different than just using a trope for the sake of filling in space?
One of the things that he does right away is he defines freedom not in a loud way and not in a political way initially. He defines it in a personal way.
Yes.
Which is really important. So he defines Luffy knowing since he was a tiny child that he wanted to be free and having this desire to create his own future and move away from the place where his grandfather has forced him to be. He's under the care of certain people. He pulls himself out of that and lives with his brothers in a garbage forest. But we find out all these quiet ways of freedom. Nami striving against Arlong when he was trying to keep her held in freedom. Dude who's in the treasure beach in a treasure bucket. I'm sad for him all the time.
Yeah.
And thank you. And his need for freedom. We have Kobe and his need to choose his direction and being under someone else's rules. So we have personal freedoms all the way across the board. And we see Luffy's desire for freedom. And every time Luffy strives for freedom, it feels like he's also striving for the freedom of everyone else. It's a quieter, more personal level freedom where somebody's freedom is being taken away by bigger ideals, but we don't touch on the bigger ideal at first. He completely just does it on a really, really personal level.
Yeah.
Like we don't talk about the fact that all the fishmen are slaves at first. We show the fishmen as enslaving, and then we only look at Nami and then what they're doing to her town. I think that was very intentional. He sets up like the entire beginning of the story, showing all the ways in which people aren't free. And then after that, he shows the larger political structures that are keeping them from that freedom and the larger political structures that want them to be free. We are introduced to Dragon in the first 100 chapters, which I know sounds like a lot if you're not into One Piece. And he is fighting for the freedom of quote unquote all people. But within the first little while, it becomes really apparent to me that he's setting things up and he's saying, I'm going to show you all the ways in which people aren't free. I'm going to show you what's keeping them from freedom. And then I'm going to show you what people are doing to bring people freedom. And I think that's why I know that freedom is a political setup in here and not just a pop-off. Otherwise, he wouldn't have built such a beautiful foundation of personal freedoms. And then what are the larger things that are keeping these people from having those freedoms?
We don't analyze these systems of oppression, power, and freedom until we've already gotten people engaged. It's thought out and we're not just jumping into these ideas.
The other reason that you would do this is if you were trying to make sure that this is a story where people just didn't run away and be like, this is too political. You would start by making people care about the people involved in it. People loved Nami. People wanted Nami to be free. The fact that Luffy came in and acted as a force of good with the Straw Hats and released Nami from slavery, people bought into it. They wanted it. It meant something to to them. Freeing a single person is a big deal. It's like they stopped showing the fields full of people who didn't have any food in the ads when they were trying to get people to give money to charities for children that were starving. And instead they just would start showing an individual kid, because people were like, I can't save all these people. And they would be like, what about this one kid? And I think that's what he really did in the beginning of the manga, is he wanted to have larger political structures, so he made you care about them by caring about the people that they affected.
I can see that. And my thought is, how do you turn that into an argument that this was done? Because you could argue that this is just done to be a good storyteller, that you do this because that's the way to get people invested in your world. Do you think that ties back to how we can prove that this was done with political intentions? While slavery and oppression come up all the time in media, regardless of if it feels political or not, and that seems insane to say to some people, but think about it. Slavery makes for an easy bad guy. What do you do in a story if you want someone to clearly be in the wrong, clearly be evil, clearly be someone we want to be defeated? Slavery. Because the evil of it is understood. It's culturally, we know that it's bad to enslave people.
Even though slavery is at an all-time high. I can see how you could say what I was saying was just a story, like a creation of a story.
Yeah.
But it's not. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you look at Nami and her freedom from Alarm Park,
Yeah.
right? Nami is being enslaved by these people. That's a terrible thing. We care. We want her unenslaved. Then we go out one more step. Nami's town is being controlled by these people. So I'm going to ask you to care about not just Nami now. I'm going to ask you to care about an entire town. And you're like, ooh, that's hard. Then we start to look out a little further, and later on we find all of the fishmen are actually being enslaved around the world and are being bought and sold in places. And that's where their anger comes from and where all this happened. Every time we look at something, he takes it up to the next level and intentionally makes it more and more political and a bigger and bigger social issue. We do it again in Alabasta. We go in and we find Vivi, and she's actually against us. And then over time, she helps Luffy learn how to be a leader. Then Luffy decides he wants to help her get back Alabasta from one bad person. Then we find out that one bad person is a part of a bigger group. Then we find out that one bad person is also part of an even bigger group that's part of the pirates. Then we find out that's linked to the evilest people at the top of the chart on the red line, and it keeps going out and out and out. He could have at any point not have continued those same threads, so they moved out and out. It still would have been amazing storytelling just to talk about Nami and then slavery. Talking about fishmen independently as a race, that would have been interesting. It would have been super interesting to meet them, and then we would have been like, oh, I remember those guys. They attacked Nami and one of them did this bad thing, that one person. But instead, every time he goes out, he doesn't talk about it separate. He shows how it's politically linked and connected to everybody's different freedoms. Do you think that the freedom is politically involved, and what's your evidence that it's politically involved?
Freedom is political. However, you can write really generically about freedom. You cannot give a shit about politics and write about freedom. One Piece writes about freedom in a way where it actually talks about what gives you freedom and what takes freedom away. And I think the deep analysis of freedom in One Piece is what makes it a political writing about freedom. So
honestly, I think we could get rid of any question and everyone could go in on it, and you could just talk about One Piece, freedom, and politics all by itself.
Yes.
Because he sets it up, and I think it is the most important thing about the entire manga, out of everything, is this question of freedom. Freedom is the entire crux of One Piece. It's the largest thread because it's the most political thing, because of the thing that you just said. Your government and the way that it runs determines the level of freedom you have in your life. And Oda knows that the thing that we care about almost more than anything else as human beings on this planet is how free we get to be. And the thing that we argue for is, am I free to do the things I like to do, or are you free to do the things you like to do? And the version of some of the things that people like to do can be dangerous and ungood. The question of freedom is a huge thing. Everything comes down to freedom. And so to start from freedom is what Oda has done. The very first thing is we find a boy who more and more as he goes through and is becoming a man, we find out freedom is the most important thing to him and his version of what it means to be the most free. And that's what you choose to make this entire thing about? That's the most political thing you can talk about. Freedom.
I agree, but I also understand why people could ignore it. So often freedom is treated as such an ambiguous thing. One of the ways that I think I realize in what you were talking about, One Piece talks about freedom in a very unique way, is the analysis of freedom and hierarchy is really interrogated. And the way I'll point that out is you can in theory be free, but celestial dragons have the freedom to take your freedom away. A celestial dragon can
Exactly.
choose to make you a slave, and you are forced to obey. Slavery is outlawed, but is
Exactly.
kept running for the celestial dragons. There is truly a different set of laws that apply to celestial dragons than everyone else. It is examining the idea that even the laws that exist in this world to facilitate people's liberties, to give them the safety that they occupy, are knowingly broken and allowed to be so for adding freedoms to those available to the ruling class, to the celestial dragons. And I don't think a series that's writing apolitically would acknowledge so well that in a society where someone is free to take your freedoms away, you can't truly be free.
Interesting that Vernu said, so Emu is the most free then. And I would say no. Where do we see Emu? What does Emu do? Where does Emu go?
Emu has power, and that power has cost needing to not exist.
Exactly. And so I don't know if Emu is the most free, even though Emu has the most control and can make the biggest changes and take away the most freedom. I don't think Emu is the most free.
In theory, Emu has freedoms that no one else has. Emu has the freedom to destroy a country. Emu has the freedom to kill anyone they want. Emu has the freedom to command the world government. But Emu doesn't have the freedom to go on an adventure with friends.
Who would you say is the most free in this world?
At the moment of story we are at, it is Marshall D. Teach.
No.
Marshall D. Teach is not being presented with real obstacles. He is doing as he pleases. He allows his crew to do as they please. They are motivated enough to serve him that they are constantly working, whether ordered or not, to improve his freedoms and his access to resources. No one has been able to stop him, and he is just following his ambition. I think at the moment, Marshall D. Teach is the most free, especially because his territories are being managed mostly out of fear. People are just acting on their own behalf to protect and work for their territories just because of Teach's name. Now,
yeah, but Marshall D. Teach can't go anywhere in the world right now. If he goes, he would have to go in the capacity of a warlord.
You're right. He would have to go as a military actor to a lot of the world.
Whereas I think that Luffy is our current most free person. Luffy can actually go anywhere as anything he wants and doesn't have to act in one way only because Teach just would only go in a military capacity.
You're right. Teach's territories, he approaches them as an occupier. He is only able to interact with them from the perspective of an oppressor. I think there's a great argument for Luffy, and I think the only reason I wouldn't say Luffy as my first answer is because Luffy has only been an emperor for a couple of weeks, so his fleet hasn't been shaping the world in his image for that long.
But I think that Oda intentionally creates a looseness in Luffy's connections to things and doesn't make him act in one single way so that he can have that freedom to him all the time in the story so that Luffy feels like the most free thing.
True.
But somebody said Enel, and
Enel's stuck in the moon!
And if Enel came down to Earth, who the shit knows who Enel is?
Yeah, he's just gonna get to be a tourist because one of the things we've talked about and why One Piece's freedom is so political is that the world government, we finally had confirmed, makes transit specifically harder. The world government intentionally makes it hard to get around. That's finally confirmed. It's been a thing people said they didn't do it on purpose. No, they did. They did, it turns out.
Yeah, they did, obviously.
Enel could skip it. Enaru could skip it. He could just teleport around as lightning and no one could stop him.
Yeah, and he could just show up places people wouldn't know who the shit he was, and he has a lot of power. Because I would think, if we're going to argue like, okay, well then the most free person would be someone you don't know. No, they can't travel around the world the same way these people can. Mm-hmm. They can't get into places these people can because power is also freedom.
Even if Enaru comes back, he doesn't have loyalists providing him more opportunity. Luffy and Blackbeard's crews and fleets are giving them more options, more opportunity. They're supporting them in their freedoms.
Not that I think that Blackbeard wants to come in and act in a good way, but Blackbeard isn't just going to a regular place to have a vacation. He has to come somewhere as a warlord, take it over, and then have people.
Even if he goes there as a vacation, he is the oppressor. He doesn't have the freedom to act as equal and peer with the people around him.
Exactly. If you don't have a freedom of choice to be the person you want situationally, then I would say that you don't have as much freedom, and I would say it's Luffy.
Fair. But I think there's a reason in how One Piece is written that these are the two you can best argue for.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the fact that we can have this argument over freedom like this, it just kind of shows that Oda built this piece from a small F freedom at a human level to big F freedoms at a political structure level, interconnected them intentionally, interconnected them politically. In my opinion, when you think of politics, you can't write a story that is threaded as freedom coded first without it being political. Freedom is innately political.
But I think people have the capacity to write poorly. I believe people have this amazing ability to not really think very much and treat freedom as a really abstract concept.
Did you just say amazing ability?
Yeah, I thought it was funny.
Carry on, my wayward son. There'll be truth when you are done.
Because I genuinely think you can write about freedom apolitically if you just treat it vague and you treat it as, I want to be free, I have freedom, I'm going to do what I want and be a goofball.
Yeah, but then you know what you just did is you proved that Oda wrote it well. Oda is a good writer. He understands that in order to write something well, you have to be writing it from a place where a paradigm exists that you're writing it. He knows that freedom is political. He's not stupid and he's a good writer. Therefore, he would not be writing it shit. Therefore, he'd be writing freedom in its political aspects.
If you are in the comments and wanting to be like, Luffy doesn't believe in politics, so how is the series political? I agree. I don't think Luffy has a political ideology. I think he has an ideology that if you extrapolated and followed yourself would be seen as political, but I don't think Luffy is a politically minded person. But I'm going to let you know, we will get to Luffy.
But Luffy whenever I want. You can't stop my freedom.
We need to set the groundwork before we can get to Luffy. He's a big deal.
Freedom, freedom, freedom.
I want to talk about leadership, okay?
Okay, why are we starting second with leadership?
You mentioned it in your run-up and it gave me ideas.
All right, pop off.
The way people would argue that leadership doesn't have to be seen as political is because there is leadership in apolitical circumstances, like a group leader or a CEO. There's a comment. Now, I don't think people realize because they treat the world they live in as a default. People really often see how the world is for them as a default way of being that is natural. Liberal society is not natural. We built this politically. There was a revolution about it.
I have a song in my head now.
A man wore a hat. So to that, I say, I fully get how you believe a CEO is not a political institution. I fully understand how you don't see a class project as political. That makes sense.
Did you just say a man wore a hat?
Yeah, a man wore a powdered wig and a hat.
Carry on.
I think if you see your world, the world you live in, as the natural way of being, you kind of just assume everything within it that's emergent is non-political. But if you live in a state that doesn't have investment capital, CEO doesn't exist. Investment capital is a decision a state makes. Being a capitalist state is a decision the government makes. That is a political choice. And I think what that made me realize is a lot of people see politics as specifically elections. They think of politics as the campaigns and beliefs of voters and elections in a democracy. And I think One Piece is genuinely more broadly political and more interestingly political. It's not just about democracies. In fact, you've probably noticed One Piece doesn't bring up democracy.
You're hitting a nail on the head there. When we talk about One Piece, people want to just make everything that is political be like political structures that they're used to.
Yeah.
And so we think about them all as democracy, whereas something that Oda has done time and again, and I've been, now that I'm allowed out in the world of One Piece, and I've been hearing some other people think, he is unafraid to touch on every country's politics, but not just today, in all days. He is unafraid to talk about everything from the Tokugawa Bafuku to Italian forms of democracy or governmency to non-governmency and Marxism and everything in between. He doesn't give a shit and goes all over the place.
It's not like the politics he's writing are entirely disconnected for the world he lives in. Now, I fully understand if you think of politics as meaning, who are you voting for? Here are the platforms of the party. And you think we are introducing into One Piece these concepts because that's the world you live in. If you've only ever seen something from one perspective, of course, that's kind of where you go. But leadership as a concept is political because politics are about the ways humans organize themselves. But people see the only type of leader that's political because the world we live in being the elected office of the president or the governor or the mayor or whatever. And someone's right, Water 7's a democracy. We don't really touch on it. But the conversations about leadership here are about the obligations a leader has to their people. It's about how to rule a crew as though it's a country. It's the lessons given by someone raised to be trained in governance, explaining to the would-be pirate king what his obligations as captain are.
So without pontificating too strongly, I want you to tell me then, why does that mean that leadership is a political concept? You're going to have to write about a leader in a place where you have so many countries and so many places. You're going to have to write about leadership. You do. So tell me why it's political here.
Again, I don't think it has to be. And this one, I don't think you need to write badly to write leadership apolitically.
Okay, tell me why.
What if you just are in a mindset where you think it's okay to treat the world we live in as a given?
Yeah.
Then can you write about learning to be a great leader, to be the captain of the Cub Scouts?
Yeah, you absolutely could.
You can write a story about someone learning to be a good CEO, someone learning how to run a classroom well. These are leadership positions.
Okay, then why do you think it makes it political?
This is an unstable setting where who is in charge isn't guaranteed. And it isn't just about what it takes to be in charge, but who deserves to, who is able to take charge. I think that feels like a very fine difference. It feels like a very nominal difference, but I think that's actually very significant because you can really only write about leadership apolitically if you assume that the government and the Cub Scouts organization are saying a scout leader is a thing that matters. You can write about leadership apolitically because you've assumed, you've taken as a given that the Cub Scouts exist and the government exists and that they are keeping these institutions in place for you, and you don't have to question that. One Piece constantly questions the validity of the leadership. It constantly questions the validity of people being in charge. And that change necessitates acknowledging, okay, what are our thoughts on who should be in charge? What are our thoughts on what being in charge well looks like? Leadership's not a skill that people just learn, but it's a skill that people learn to deserve the right to change the world, to deserve the right to change the lives of the people underneath them.
So to layman's term, what you're saying, you're talking about how in One Piece, we've seen time and time again, that rather than just saying this is the leader and this is how it is and it's a given, that we question leadership, we look at whether or not leadership is going well, and we also, especially in the case of Luffy, learn how to become a better leader. And even though Luffy doesn't acknowledge that he is a leader or should be a leader, every single time that he grows as a person, he grows in leadership intentionally.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like, think about this, right? Is the movie I described political where someone's learning how to be a good Cub Scouts leader?
Yeah, well, it's not, unless we make it political, and I want to see that movie.
Yeah, but is the movie political where the person who's learning to be a good Cub Scouts leader reevaluates who should be allowed and pushes for change within the organization to change the qualifications and standards for a Cub Scout leader?
Not only is it, but that's a movie I want to see.
That actually sounds good, doesn't it?
And I have an amazing name for it. Scouting.
That's pretty good. It's not bad.
It is. It's simple. They're looking about changing. They're scouting for change. Like, come on.
To the commenter, when we said all forms of leadership are political, I actually, in retrospect, while I do believe I'm right because politics is the act of organizing humans, I do think you don't necessarily need to write about leadership politically. But One Piece very much does. I think the second you question the structure of leadership, you are making a political message instead of an apolitical message.
So your argument would be that it becomes political only the minute you are questioning the structure of leadership.
Not necessarily only. I think that's one way you can guarantee that it's being written politically. There are likely others I'm not thinking of, but I don't think you can write about questioning the structures that enable a leader to function that is apolitical. I don't think that can happen.
There's a lot of places too when we question the structure of leadership, from like Alabasta and Ennis, Sabaody,
Skypiea,
Dressrosa, Skypiea, Whole Cake Island, Wano, constant Luffy, more Luffy.
Constantly we question the validity. I think Dressrosa is my favorite, and I bring this up all the time. Was King Riku a good king if his people were free, but he was too weak to protect their freedom? Does a state have the obligation to defend what it offers? And I used to be against this point. I've come around. If your country is going to be unable to protect what it offers, then you didn't offer it. And that sucks because obviously you also blame the invader. You do.
Which means you came around, unfortunately for you, to my way of thinking, because it's what I talked about with Whitebeard, when he quote unquote made Fish Island free, but it was only free if he was there.
Yeah.
Then he didn't actually give them freedom. That's not real freedom.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same as Shanks. He's going around needing to do things he doesn't want to do. He's not free. He's doing things he doesn't want to do.
No, he's
because
not.
He won't be able to keep people safe if his name is weak.
Yeah, exactly. And so you
Right?
can't sit there and claim that you have freedom or that you have created freedom for somebody through your work if when you're not around, they're not free.
And that scene highlights how free Luffy is. Because while
Exactly.
Shanks has to do that, Luffy has someone apologizing and learning their lesson and doing everything they can to make the consequences not come back to Luffy.
Exactly.
That's such a difference. Because he's acting merely out of inspiration, Luffy's freedom is not lost from Barto's actions.
Exactly.
Yeah, dude. You've talked about the historical allusions proving that it's political. So let's touch on that quickly.
I see One Piece as being so deeply historical. When somebody said, oh, Oda is a person who really likes history, I was like, yep, no duh. Because for me, he brings in things that are direct historical references that I'm always like, God dang, this man is a genius. It was so cool for me because there was a person who wrote their master's paper on comfort women from World War II. And after we had our whole talk about Amazon Lily, they actually said, I cannot believe I didn't see this before. This is so deeply about comfort women. After having written the paper, it blows my mind that I couldn't see it. And he does that over and over again. I also think, though, you and I are still in contention about this.
Yes. We have a different interpretation of this, and this will be its own stream at some point.
Which I love. I love that we're both interpreting different. I think that in general, and by no means do I think this is the only thing that One Piece is doing. Let me just say that.
Yes, absolutely. That's necessary.
This is just a minor thread. I think it's a thread. I think Oda has threaded World War II throughout the entirety of One Piece, all the way from the beginning to the end. I think the falling of the Berlin Wall is going to be when we see the red line come down. I think we just saw atomic weaponry with the Leluja being destroyed. I have all sorts of other areas in which I think, including the comfort women, including Impel Down being similar to all the different very, very bad imprisonments that people, including Nazis, put people through in concentration camps and other things. But I really do think that the entire story has kind of a threaded, coded background of the history of World War II, including, I believe, that the Cold War part is about to come out, that we're going to see, and a rebuilding of nations in a very different way in Elbaf. So I'm looking forward to it.
Holy shit. If Cold War were happening,
yeah,
aren't we kind of seeing the start of the first proxy war with Barto and Shanks?
Yes, we are.
Interesting. It's not nothing.
Just saying, he keeps attaching actual historical events to things that are in his story, including, like, I don't care if you can't see it. It's there. When you look at Whole Cake Island, the fact that he used the name for the tree that is also the name of the person who wrote Wizard of Oz, and then he talked about and looked at a system of governance through there. He's literally picking out different time periods and different historical pieces and shoving them in so under everybody's nose that it's just
I think
brilliant.
nothing in One Piece is simple.
Oh no, I still think it's Franco and everything else. I'm just saying the hidden core of World War II occupied Europe. I have it in order. I've become obsessed with it.
We'll do a video for this.
A little hinty hint.
Little taste.
The Void Century is censorship.
Yes.
You've got human experiments and ethics going on in Punk Hazard.
Yep.
You have all of the historical things like Baroque works with Crocodile and Amazon Lily and all these different places that can be connected to historical parallels in culture. Then you have racial discrimination and the political hatred. It goes from World War I at the end of World War I into, I think it's going to go past the Cold War, but that's for later. You've got revolutionary armies. He didn't have to make revolutionary armies and calling them revolutionary armies. Revolution is political.
Here's a real quick one, and I know we're gonna have to talk about this in the Luffy video more. I know people have some negative thoughts about the man, and understandably, not a perfect figure. Dragon is meant to be Che Guevara. He dresses the same, and my man Oda literally has a portrait of Che Guevara in his office. Early photos confirmed that. The way that's made so clear that we're coming at it from a Marxist angle about the bourgeois is Dragon says his goal isn't actually to fight the world government. He's okay with an organized world government and the nations working together. He's only after the ruling class of elites who a different set of laws apply to. This is definitely meant to be an allegory. Now, is he just Che Guevara? No, he's acting differently. He's his own man.
He's other people too.
He's a character in a fictional story, but he clearly fills that role.
But look, you've got a revolutionary army. You've got a world government who's authoritarian. Here are your major players. And then you've got pirates who are trying to act outside of the system. Outside of what system? Thank you for asking. A system with a hidden dark government at the top that is leading everyone to live in one way. Then you have racial discrimination used as a weapon, a social weapon for control for everyone. Like, this is a massive political masterpiece. The major players of One Piece are all politically backed. They all sit in a political place.
I want to touch on something that you made me think of real quick. And this is one of, I think, the best points of One Piece being both political and using Marxist analysis. Okay?
I would agree that there is some Marxism, but I would say that's not the major thing.
Yes. So Marxist analysis, here's one of my biggest points to why I think this is here and why I think things are definitely political. If you were just making an evil government to be the bad bad guys and they are just there to be bad, wouldn't you make all of them evil?
Exactly.
If you were making the ruling class of celestial dragons just be there to be punched, instead of making them be shaped by their material circumstances, which is a fancy political Marxist analysis term that means the things around you that affect your life, the structures around you that impact how you live, wouldn't it not be their material circumstances that make them the way they are? But wouldn't they be intrinsically bad? Wouldn't we see them not change and become good from their experiences?
None of them would be able to change.
Exactly. The reason I think this is so deeply political, more than anything, honestly, is that if these were just here for the sake of having bad guys and it weren't here to make a point about how Oda sees the world, things wouldn't be as nuanced. Now, you could be a good writer and add that nuance in, but I think it's far more likely, to my imagining, that it is intentional, that there is thought behind the fact that it's these people's circumstances that have shaped them, that it's the structures that are the problem. One Piece is not a critique of bad guys. It's a critique of systems. Now, there are bad guys, and they deserve a walloping because they're doing bad stuff. But the system and its evil is always acknowledged. Garp chooses not to become an admiral so that he can be free instead of having to follow the orders of the Celestial Dragons. People will talk about how Marx was like, you just have to kill the rich. Marx wrote a lot about how material circumstances forced wealthy people into misery in just as many ways as it forced poor people into misery.
When I'm saying hidden beneath your nose political structures, some people might just see it as good writing to do things where they punish the people who are dragons who don't do the things that dragons are supposed to do, but that's a political choice. Anytime you have a ruling, quiet shadow government who's ruling over, you need your upper class to behave in a certain way in order for the lower class, your proletariat, to have something to look for and to want to be, and in order to control the proletariat. If you don't have people who are saying how you should live and what you should do and upholding the systems for you, then you have to be down there all the time with an army putting the people back into control. But if you can have people like the dragons who can punish, who can lead the way of living the best life, who can be seen as the greatest example of humanity, who get the greatest things so that other people are like, ooh, I wish I could be like them, then you would have to have a country that is totally in control or controlled all the time. You need them. That is a political weapon. An upper class is not just an upper class for no reason. It is a political weapon that means you don't have to have boots on the ground maintaining the discipline of the place that you are ruling.
Now, again, that doesn't need to be political in a story, but this is a story that acknowledges those factors and plays with them and references them.
Yes.
And the fact that it's aware of that and makes it part of the story, I think makes it far more political.
I saw the idea of overthinking of it. And first of all, I'm not overthinking. I have one mode and it's called thinking deeply. And that's what I always tell people. That's not overthinking. That's just how I think. But on the other hand, I think that it's not overthinking. If I could be fair here, there are some things that are so politically obvious. You don't have your entire story based off of four main political groups with an overruling shadow government and then tell me that this isn't based on a political thing. I think people are underthinking.
So EA Killer is also bringing up, this does feel a lot like when people kept insisting that Lord of the Rings about World War I, when Tolkien himself insisted that it wasn't. And for starters, Tolkien lied about some of his shit. I'm going to be real with you. This is one of those situations where you can't only listen to what's said. You can't just take what people say at face value. You kind of need to interrogate ideas. Tolkien wrote about how his experiences in the war were harrowing, but they reinforced his belief that good will triumph, that good will clear the day. He wrote a setting where the core principle of the setting is that there will be dark times and things will deteriorate and get worse. However, good will triumph. That is his belief, and it was baked into his setting. Now, was it an allegory for World War I? Not necessarily, but there's no world where that wasn't inspired by experiences when he wrote about how those experiences gave him that concept. I think it's fair to examine it. It's fair to cross-reference it, and there is political intentionality in Lord of the Rings. Tolkien did intend for some of his perspectives about things to be implemented. Not in the same way as Oda, obviously, but in a similar way. That being said, I think if we said One Piece was just World War II, and that's what people took from this, Oda would probably be like, that's not true, because
he'd be like, no,
of course it's more than that. I don't think it is just the opinions of an adult being inserted because he's an adult and is writing it. I think this is deeply intentional.
This is one of the reasons that I think that Oda decided to do this so deeply political. And this is one of the reasons that I think that he not only decided to do it political, he might not have even decided to do it political. I think he decided to do it historical. And I don't just mean World War II by any breadth of the imagination. I mean historical. He chose to use historical references, historical allusions, historical issues, and put them in here. And this is why I think so. So Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy, this is what he said. My generation was suddenly drafted into a war and then devastated by defeat. We had lived in a happy-go-lucky paradise and we didn't have any mental or psychological preparation for the shock of battle and defeat. If we had been more prepared, perhaps we wouldn't have been so bitter or broken. This is why he said that he ended up creating Astro Boy so that he could better prepare young readers for the challenges and harsh realities of life. And I've talked about this before because of his own traumatic experiences from World War II. And I think that somebody like Oda, who is clearly a freaking genius, who is clearly beyond the pale. The man has an incredible ability to write a story, but also is an amazing researcher and a known history buff. And I think that one of the reasons he did this story, and one of the reasons he got more and more deep into doing it when he called it a story for young boys and a story for young boys, and he just kept saying that, is because he believes that this is a story also of preparation. And he's actually teaching kids to give a shit about politics in an adventure way. And he's teaching kids to understand that there are things in this world that are pulling buttons, and then you have to live by what they do because they were either voted in or they took over. And he includes everyone's politics, and he lets people see politics from all over the world and the impact they have on every kind of freedom you could imagine. And I think it is a very intentional, very deliberate, very planned, very hidden and open thing that Oda has done to actually help kids swallow and understand political ideas before they grow up in a historical concept, so that when they grow up and they start finding these political things come up in their life, they're actually able to have some understanding them. I guarantee people who have read One Piece and who have enjoyed it have accidentally understood political ideas or historical aspects of politics better because they're like, oh, weirdly, that reminds me of this. And they're right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the politics, in my opinion, are not just a result of historical allegory, but I think the historical allegory is very intentional, and I think the politics are there for exactly that reason. I don't think he's lying when he says he wants it to be a story for young boys. I think you were right. He wants it to be a story about the world, a story that informs people about how dark the world can be, that gets them to question the world.
Prepares people to live in that world, prepares children to grow up and live in this world.
Mm-hmm. A world where maybe authority should sometimes be questioned, where you shouldn't just do what you're told, where you shouldn't assume that the way things are is the way they should be.
That there is a hidden agenda, that the government might not always be acting in your best interest, that you actually have to care about what's taking place. Okay, I'm having trouble seeing how people don't see the politics in it. And
there's YouTubers I respect who will be like, people read too much into it. It's great, well written and thematically deep, but it's a silly pirate manga. Like, there's really good analyzers who seem to have this opinion.
Yeah, but okay, do you want to hear me talk about something that we don't want to talk about?
Go for it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
So let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Okay, Oda and I come from the same generation.
You do. You love your generation because you need to, because no one else talks about them.
Nobody else knows our generation exists, so I'm the only one out here talking about it. So Diddy was a huge big deal in my day.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it. How is it possible that people can't see some of the things that different political people believe or say? And how are people allowing them to be fooled? And why can't people hold their ideas lighter and be willing to be wrong about things? This is a thing I think in my head all the time. And I ask myself, how can I make people be willing to open their mind and see things from lots of different angles? Okay. And then I talk about cognitive dissonance and how when you hold a belief and you hold it really firmly, when somebody has an opposite belief in that area, it actually causes pain in your brain. And this is for a bunch of reasons. They're cultural and otherwise within each person. That cognitive dissonance is a really painful thing. And therefore your brain will make workarounds so you don't think that. Okay, now let's get back to Diddy. Diddy was a massive big deal in my day. And I don't think people understand Tupac, Diddy, Eazy-E, all these people. Huge people in my day. He helped to shape all sorts of performers that I really loved, and he helped to shape music. One of the things that connected us globally as a generation was not just music, it was hip-hop music. It was so different from anything that our parents had listened to. In the 70s, rap started, but it was so underground and it wasn't a thing that was really there. But in my time for Gen X, hip-hop and rap was the thing that really defined us as not being our parents. And so when I started to see the people that were in this with Diddy, that did terrible things, and that somebody that I had really enjoyed as a writer and a producer and have been impressed with the things that he's done with his world, when I started to see that things that came out, I immediately wanted to go into cognitive dissonance. I immediately wanted to be like, this is crap. The right wing are constantly pushing an agenda that everybody inside of Hollywood and the music industries are corrupt and da-da-da-da-da, and why do we have to do this? And then I immediately had to remind myself, you're doing the thing that you're always saying that people are doing. You actually have to trust the evidence, and you have to take a pause, and you have to do your own research, and you have to go through a bunch of different things, and then you have to sit in it, and you have to sit in the discomfort that you're having because of it, and you have to ask yourself if it is likely that anyone would lie about this, especially people spending so much time getting the evidence in order. And I'm seeing people defending them to the end. Poor Diddy, this happens. People don't understand. He's just a bit of a freak. That's not true. I'd like to go there. It's not true. There's no way that this person isn't involved and this person is involved. These people are good men, blah, blah, blah. We're just spattering their name. I'm sorry, it's not true. I've actually had to confront my cultural biases and my political biases and a bunch of other things. And it's uncomfortable, and I hate to admit it, but dear God, this is going to reach far. And these people that I had admiration for are actually monsters. And what a cognitive dissonance this has caused in my world. So when I'm looking at things like finding liberal ideas inside of manga that you enjoy, that when you come to it, you get to bring yourself as a child and you get to feel nostalgic and safe and happy, and you get to dive into something that gives you such pleasure where you don't have to bring in the bitterness of the world around you. That's when I realized why you could say to yourself, One Piece isn't political, because you don't want it to be political and you want it to work within your system and follow your beliefs, because it's a place where you find joy and happiness, just like Diddy and his music and other people were places that I found joy and happiness. And all the signs are there. We so want to believe what we think that we don't bother to question the truth. And so then I said to myself, I think I know why people are able to read this manga and ignore the things that create cognitive dissonance for them and that disagree with their way of seeing the world. I know that it's hard for people. I know that it's hard for me. I have had an experience of mass cognitive dissonance that for the last 3 days, I have been wading through like a person wading through quicksand, which all people in Gen X thought was going to be a bigger problem when they grew up.
All media, boomers love to put quicksand and stuff.
And so I think it's really interesting because now that I've experienced my own cognitive dissonance in such a slap in the face, I actually get it now. I get why you can avoid the signs. I get why you could ignore what's there. And I get why you would just say you're overthinking it. I felt like listening to Diddy's music felt like I was listening to Diddy's beliefs. And so I started to wonder, maybe if you are a right-wing person who believes that left-wing is evil, maybe if you believe that One Piece had a left agenda, you couldn't read it because you would feel like you were being indoctrinated, and you were being indoctrinated to something that you thought was evil, and therefore you could no longer enjoy it, and you would have to rage against the dying of the light to say that this was not political or especially not liberal. Like maybe you would, and maybe it's too soon, and maybe it will never be the time for Diddy again for me. But I'm telling you, I can't listen to it now. I absolutely can't. And I don't know if I'm going to come across of being able to.
On my perspective, I mentioned 300 and Dark Knight Rises. Now, obviously, I have a bit more distance for these, and I went in able to decipher their political messages as I went. And I'm fine enjoying them. And it's because if you are aware of the politics, why are you afraid? Imaginary right-winger who probably clicked off this video 30 seconds in, why are you afraid of One Piece disagreeing with you? Do you think you're going to be convinced? Well, if you don't want to be, read it consciously. Having a subconscious politic in media means it can affect you if you ignore it.
Exactly.
Genuinely, when I read the Dark Knight Rises, when I watch 300, I look at the elements that are to me fascist, to the elements that seem as though they are promoting what I would call an evil philosophy, and I acknowledge them consciously. I think,
exactly.
This person believes this way about the world and the needs of society. I disagree. The conscious interaction with work is powerful. If you are capable of enjoying work that you acknowledge the politics are opposed to yours, what does that say about you? And here's what I'm going to tell you, and this is amazing. This is going to liberate all of you. This is going to liberate everyone to enjoy freely. The media you like says literally nothing about you. Your personality is not a movie you like. Your humanity is not a TV show you watch. You are a complex, layered, multifaceted creature. You are an event, a being that takes in the world around you and processes it into a person, an entity that has never existed and could, without your intervention, never exist. You are a wonderful, unique specimen of existence, the universe seeing itself. And the films you watch and take in are just part of shaping your perspective and coming to know the world better, to be a better view. That's all the media is. It's training, it's learning, it's thinking. And if you're actively engaging with something you disagree with, that's a better learning to me. You can be learning the perspective of another person, of someone who sees the world from an entirely different perspective. Isn't that incredible?
Obviously, books and stuff don't define who you are, because I watch the same 4 comfort anxiety movies, but they don't define me. And that is why I would only give a book like Ender's Game or any of them to somebody if I then said, this is a view that this person has, this is how they feel about the world. While you're reading this book, I want you to remember that that's their thinking. This doesn't change who you are, but you should be aware of perspectives.
But yeah, deeply interrogate media. Think about it. Question what you're consuming. Understand if it disagrees with you. Try not to be unaware. Take in the politics.
But you know what? I think that that's the problem, is we're talking about, is One Piece political? And the answer is shit, yeah, One Piece is political. And I'm sorry that's hard on you. And I'm sorry if that upsets you. But if it does upset you, just be aware that we're possibly right and just give a read.
Hey, but guess what? We're also possibly wrong. The media you consume doesn't define who you are. It isn't part of you. It's not your personality, but your opinion does.
Yeah.
Form an intelligent opinion. Think about what you watch.
Yeah.
Be part of the process. I am fully of the opinion that art is not complete until it is consumed. That the act of engaging, the act of being an audience member is the completion of artwork. Be part of that completion of the artwork. Think, debate, discuss, analyze, break down. When someone says over-analysis is a problem, it can be if you get lost in it, but analysis to begin with is part of media. It's part of what the story's there for.
And I realized, I'm going to say a thing to piss people off now, that just like Anna Karenina, I don't have to read things that I don't think are very good. Oh, yeah, that's what I said.
I do want to read things by people I disagree with more, and that's something I'm going to start.
The Café Philosophique in the 17th and 18th century, places that people would get together. They were in France. I don't know if you could tell that by the way I said philosophique. And it was a political social hub where people could come and they would just exchange ideas and sit around. And apparently it caught on so much that they started to do these things in salons, which we now call living rooms. And people would host little parties in their house where people would get together and they would come and talk about politics and art and philosophy and have like amazing conversations with each other where they disagreed and agreed. And I think that's missing. So much better to look somebody in the face. It's harder to be a dick when you're looking at somebody's face and being a dick. And so you have to have a more respectful way. And remember, I'm going to have to look at this person's face again. And I'm going to have to try to be less of a dick. Try to be less of a dick. It's a great name for the club. I'm gonna have to shorten it, I think. But I think I want to start a club.
Okay. I mean, that idea is part of why I want to do videos like this, where we can talk about politics through One Piece, because it's meant to be political. And I think like 10 years ago or so, it'd be a lot easier to be like, hey, let's politically talk about One Piece and have it be chill. And things are so heated that it feels like this big violent undertaking to insert politics into fun pirate manga. But I think it's worth taking on. I think it's worth adding that to the discourse and being willing to talk about it, because I genuinely, while some people disagree,
people are coming up with names. Look at Dickless Club.
But you can enjoy One Piece as a story without politics. I still think it's worth acknowledging. Again, it goes against the ethos of this episode. The ethos of this episode is, how do you analyze if media is political? And I can't be doing that if I fall back on One Piece has a goddamn framed picture of Che Guevara in his office, but he does.
So what you just did is really, really walking the line of jerkdom.
I'm not trying to. Here's what I'm saying. That doesn't help you with identifying politics and media, but I think a lot of what we talked about did. The fact that if you just talk about things as an aesthetic, sure, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but that if you're deeply analyzing the meaning of things like freedom and leadership, and you're talking about the validity of those, the forces that stop them, if you're talking about the material forces of the bad guys, the pressures put upon them, all of that makes something a lot more political than if all of that was hand wavy, that if the author didn't care about all of that, right?
I think the reason that I can say that it's political comfortably is because the author doesn't leave unfinished business. He continues to use them. He uses the same paradigm that he creates in the beginning, and he talks about them, and we see the political change happen over time. We see the impact it has on people. That is a political thing. He doesn't just talk about the politics. He shows its impact on the populace in One Piece and in the world that is being created. He understands his setting, and he shows you what happens to all the people that you've grown to love. He makes you love them, and then he shows you how they're impacted by politics. And
Absolutely.
you can tell that's political because the author cares enough about the people and forces you to care enough about the people that he creates rich people. Now, he wouldn't go and hurt them then when he loves the people that he created and show it being bad unless he really wanted to send you a political message.
I think you still could create stakes in a story, but the specific way he's doing it, where it's showing how the system is harming people, not just how people are hurting people, is so different. If you just showed it to set up a bad guy, it's really different than showing about the problems of the system. It really is the consideration for these things that makes it feel like the politics are intentional.
You can't say that a person who puts this much attention to details doesn't intentionally make the politics. They don't just accidentally frickin' happen. This is a very intentional writer. And so if there are politics in here, and there are politics in here, they aren't just the afterthought or the necessity of creating a story with that political piece. They're thoughtful, they're intentional.
Someone is saying, I think at best an argument you could see is that it's a non-political story taking place in a political world. I don't see that as necessarily possible, but saying that it ends in an apolitical way is possible. I think that's very possible. And I think that would just be a story that's more interested in being descriptive than prescriptive. And what that means is it would be a story that wants to point out political issues in the world, but it just wants to explore their complexities. And it's not trying to prescribe a solution. It's not telling you what to do to change the world. It's just introducing you to political complexities. And there's a chance that's how One Piece will end. I don't know that that's not how it'll end. I just don't think that's how it'll end.
Hi there, YouTube. It's me, Mama Drawk. I'm going to make a club. I don't know what it's going to be called, but these people have created the greatest names in the history of everything.
Is the plug for your club?
It's a plug for club. You're going to love the club even though you're not in it. You don't live here, so you can't be a part of it. It's going to be impossible. If you enjoy listening to Drawk and I bother each other, the inserts of our mad thoughts as we ramble off in different directions about One Piece, subscribe. If you don't agree with this and you love not agreeing out loud, do it. Subscribe. Subscribe because you want Drawk to do more to Garp's face. Subscribe because you like subscribing. We are almost at 20,000. I have gotten Drawk the world's greatest outfit. Cannot wait for you to wear his wig. Anyway, and then we're going to start inviting other people to come along. If you know of any people, don't just say the same people. We know who you want to see us with.
I want to talk to Grand Line Review, god damn it. Nobody brings him up. I like him. He's Australian.
We're going to have them come on in and do their favorite arc with us, and we're going to analyze it with them. And I think that's going to be the most fun thing in the history of ever. Also, Drawk has a new channel. It's where he does his RPGs. What's it called, Drawk?
It's called Drawk Show RPGs.
It's going to be hard for you to remember, but give it your best shot. That is where you will find all that content. Go there. Do it. Do it. If you want to send us any mail, you go to this address. Damn, that's good stuff. What's our next Patreon movie? I want to watch Film Rad. In the Mama Drawk Book Club, we are doing Witch Hat Italy.
And we'll do streams about it where I start reading after you and your book chat have gotten far.
It's gonna be amazing. Us and join the Patreons. Those are the people who pay for the editors to do things. I don't have anything unhinged to say. Do you want me to just come up with an unhinged word? Parachute pickle. That's all. Have a good day.
Can anyone guess why this is what I chose to draw for today's stream? These characters represent the political ideals of One Piece. In one family, you have these different perspectives on the way the world should be.
It's so cool. And then, of course, behind them, you can't see it because they're a shadow, is the shadow government. The shadow government. You can't do a delete your art this late, can you?
They did, so I guess I'll delete the eye.
Or the face.
I'm not getting rid of the entire face. All right, let's finish this up, all right?
Are we doing drip?
What? Jesus fucking Christ, okay.
Okay, this is how I think we should end it. I think we should say which our favorite political arc is. For political reasons, not arc reasons. If we were to say which is the best political arc today.
Ooh, there's a couple. There's like a few choices floating around in my head.
No.
It's tough.
You might change it later, but you have to say it's your favorite.
I think my favorite arc for its politics is Whole Cake Island.
Really?
I think it's interesting that it took on modern liberalism and that it was so different its political take, that we had Luffy inspire change in someone instead of just beat up and dethrone the ruler. That there is this implicit threat getting people to be in line, but that you can make all these interesting arguments about Whole Cake being better than most places. I think like it's really compellingly written to analyze from a political lens. I think it's fascinating. I had such a blast going over it with you.
Okay, I think it's a really cool take. I would want to say Impel Down because have you ever heard about how I feel about Impel Down?
Yeah, it's your favorite. You love it.
I love it. I love me an Impel Down. But if I'm talking politics purely, I think my favorite arc is Sabayoti.
Oh, talking about the disparity of privilege and introducing the world nobles.
Yeah, and looking at shadow governments and looking at racism as a political tool, bunch of things.
Wow.
I think that I could have a different favorite political arc every time. Like,
absolutely.
It's crazy how well it's done.
But I think you can see that we're not people who are injecting politics in everything, because we're reading Undead Unluck philosophically, because that's its themes. It's not trying to be political, it's trying to be philosophical.
And it's quite beautiful. I'm pissed off everybody in the world isn't reading Undead Unluck now. We had Jackie, the voice of Fuko from the anime, on one of our Twitches. I have no words for how cool that was. Dude, read it. It's wildly good.
Disney has apparently criminally under-advertised the anime to the point that it might not get another season. Please watch Undead Unluck.
It's so unique. In the first 30 chapters, we were like, it's okay. And then we started reading more, and both of us were like, damn, this is amazing.
The criteria we set out on was to prove that One Piece was written with politics in mind, that it was an agenda of the author.
We tried to argue with each other, and we tried to say that can One Piece not be read as a political piece where politics are a thing that happens? And right now, we are both in agreement that it doesn't feel possible, that the politics are an afterthought, that the politics are the thread.
The politics don't feel incidental. They feel like they are a goal, but not in a way that the series is meant to just be about politics, but in the way that it's meant to take them seriously, make them part of a story, really acknowledge the influence politics have on the world. I think that's it, that because One Piece is a series about its setting, it has to take its politics seriously to be as good as it does. It has to have that be an intentional theme, intentional commentary.
And that when you have an author who's incredibly good at their job, like Goda, then you have to remind yourself that somebody with that level of ability isn't doing things accidentally. Mm-hmm. So read into it, try to pay attention to it. If you think that we're overanalyzing, then I would suggest to you, is it possible you're underanalyzing?
True. Audience engagement is a part of media. And when a man dedicates himself so dearly to the craft of writing a story that doctors need to advise him to relax as he gets into his now 27th year of spending the vast majority of his waking hours dedicated to a single story, maybe we do owe it to him to overthink this.
Don't just understand. Overstand.
That's pretty good. That's pretty solid.
We had so much fun here today. I hope you had a lot of fun too. If we've pissed you off in any way, that's awesome. Congratulations, you got to feel something. That's the life, man. New, interesting, and varied experiences, and getting pissed off. Well, congratulations, you're alive. It's like being scared. Woohoo! You know you're alive because you're mad. Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you soon, everybody.
Talking about One Piece again like this is just making me realize how freaking good it is.
It's really good.
No, it's not really good. It's really good.
True. It needs to be said slowly.
The Chocolate Conspirators is really good. Kaido is killing this. Excuse me, Drawk. I don't like Garp's chin or eyes very much. Also, his eyes are too close together, even if it's perspective.
His chin is actually messed up. It should be like this.
Although, actually, I'm in love with Dragon, and I need you to know that.
His eyes are not too close together. I'm looking at the reference. They are closer together in the reference. It's crazy.
I hate
His
it.
face is insane.
Make it bigger.
I did get the jaw wrong, though. I did get the chin wrong.
Thank you, Patreons. Thank you, everyone who came here to watch the show today and subscribed. Thank you, everyone who continues to follow us on this journey. Come along for Undead Unluck.
Please do. It's so good. Everybody, until next time.
Squish on, squishies.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Drawk, I still don't like his chin.
I'm looking at reference. The man's got a brick of a chin.